Really is only one place to start, and that is with Conor Gallagher's future. And things look like they're getting a little bit unsavoury at Stamford Bridge. It feels like Gallagher has been edging towards an exit from Chelsea for a couple of seasons now. But this time, it could be for real. Mark, Michael, welcome along again. Mark, let's start with you. How soon could we find out if Conor Gallagher is indeed on his way out at Chelsea?
Well, we say potentially this weekend there could be a big decision made. However, it could rumble on into next week as well. It's always safe to say there's one big transfer saga over the course of the summer, and it feels like at the moment it centres around Conor Gallagher, because we are getting information almost on an hourly basis to change and contradict what we've been told previously. It's a very movable feast. Now, the latest information is that Atletico Madrid had agreed a deal with Chelsea this week worth, we believe, 40 million euros, which is around 34 million pounds. However, there was no forthcoming situation with regards to a medical or him travelling out to Madrid, which leaves us to believe that he is thinking about this potential offer from Atletico Madrid. The information we have this afternoon is that Madrid have given Conor Gallagher until the end of the weekend to decide whether he is interested in joining Diego Simeone's side. Chelsea do not want him to run down his contract. He is into the final year of his Chelsea contract at the moment, so therefore next summer could leave on a free. Like Rudiger did, like Christensen did, Chelsea absolutely don't want that situation. He is, of course, a player that has been playing this summer for Gareth Southgate in England. So he's not been on Chelsea's pre-season tour. He's been allowed a little bit of additional time off, but he is due back at Cobham, the training ground, on Monday. Chelsea's first team are due back on Wednesday. So, yeah, that's the situation with regards to the Atletico Madrid side of things. But, of course, there are always two sides to every coin.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a moment. Michael, Atletico Madrid, as Mark has been explaining, have got a deal agreed. But with 4 weeks to go until deadline day today, is there a chance he could yet remain in the Premier League, be it at Chelsea or another Premier League club?
Yes, as you mentioned, Chelsea is his current club, where, you know, he was captain for the vast majority last season under Mauricio Pochettino. I, yourself, Darmesh and other colleagues speaking to Mauricio nearly every week, talking about Conor Gallagher. We talked about him last summer, we talked about him last January, and I think all in all, he had a pretty good season last year compared to the Chelsea midfielders, you know, and the Chelsea fans like him. Actually, no, I'll go one further. The majority of Chelsea fans love him. Comparing him to the other midfielders, you know, the fans like him a lot. That's him there, of course. But look, we know there's the chance that he could stay at Chelsea, but we also know that there's interest from Aston Villa and Tottenham Hotspur. Now, Tottenham Hotspur and Chelsea don't usually do deals, but football changes, boardrooms change. And I was talking about there, wasn't I, just about the comparison maybe with the midfielders and the influence he has. On the two players on the right-hand side are over £100 million footballers, aren't they? I mean, they were record signings for Chelsea. He played a lot of games, 37 out of the 38 games. There's plenty to ponder for Conor Gallagher. This is a player who does not want to sit on a bench. So he has a lot of this thinking to do. But of course, now, we talked about interest from Aston Villa and Tottenham. Whether he was keen on a move to Aston Villa, we're not sure. Tottenham potentially. But what we do know is Chelsea will demand a lot more money from those two clubs than they are from Atletico Madrid.
I was going to say, it's not the same package, is it? The 40 million euros is for Atletico Madrid. Chelsea do not want to sell to a Premier League rival. And if one of those clubs you mentioned comes to the Chelsea table to say, let's have a look at a deal for Conor Gallagher, it's not going to be on those terms, because they are very reluctant to strengthen one of their rivals. And I think that's an important thing to point out here. Whilst we've got a starting point for Madrid, that's not necessarily the same starting point for another Premier League side.
Mark, you mentioned before that this story keeps developing. Well, I can tell you that one source has told Sky Sports News that Chelsea made 2 contract offers to Conor Gallagher. It's understood both of those offers were identical. So they were the 2-year deal plus the 1-year option. The first offer, we're told, came 4 days before the start of Euro 2024, when Gallagher, we think, had the chance to join Aston Villa. I know, Michael, you mentioned there was interest there, but didn't want to take up that chance to join Aston Villa. The other one came this week. before Chelsea indeed agreed a deal with Atletico Madrid on those reduced terms at around £34 million. As far as Gallagher is concerned, we're told that he is open to signing a long-term contract at Chelsea that's in line with the contract lengths that are offered to the other Chelsea midfielders, two of the ones that you just mentioned there, Michael, a case in point in Enzo Fernandez and in Moises Caicedo. But if a deal cannot be agreed with Chelsea, then we're told that Gallagher will continue to assess all of his options, and we expect one of those options to remain Atletico Madrid and that £34 million bid that has been agreed and that remains on the table. What do you make of all that, Mark?
It certainly seems unsavoury. I think you look at the situation there. We looked at the metrics on yesterday's transfer show, and Conor Gallagher is the standout midfielder at Chelsea last season. He ranked either first or second for everything when it came to winning the ball back, creating chances, winning the ball high up the pitch, his passing, his minutes. He was captain fantastic on many occasions, and clearly Mauricio Pochettino valued him so highly that he was prepared to hand him the armband at Stamford Bridge. But we're getting one piece of information from one side, we're getting another piece of information from another side, and you get the feeling that somewhere in the middle actually is a player of Chelsea captain calibre who has come through that system. He wants to be at Chelsea, he wants to remain at Chelsea, he's open to signing a new contract, but yet he's almost being used as a commodity, so they don't lose money if he goes for a free. There'll be 100% offset against PSR, so there's a willingness from Chelsea to try and generate some funds to reinvest. And it feels like that man in the middle there is not really being thought about in this situation, and this isn't what you want to see. And Chelsea fans certainly won't want to see something like this, will they, Michael?
No. What's interesting is this as well, maybe we're not talking enough about maybe Enzo Maresca and what he wants. We talked about, we haven't mentioned it, Trevor Chalobah not being part of their tour of the United States. Is it Enzo Maresca basically saying, these are the players I don't really want, I'm the head coach, in terms of the transfer fees, that has nothing to do with me?
There was one piece of information that we've also been given, and that was with regards to Enzo Maresca and his identity and style of football that he wants to bring to Chelsea for next season, which perhaps will be a little bit different to what Mauricio Pochettino had. And there was a line saying and suggesting that Conor Gallagher may not find himself in that Chelsea starting 11 because he is not the right type of midfielder that Enzo Maresca wants for this new look Chelsea as well. Now, some will say that's just Chelsea saying, look, you're not going to play so much, so actually you need to go. However, it also may be an element of truth there because Enzo Maresca's brought in Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall from Leicester, who's a player who he does know and likes and wants to play. We also know Caicedo. We also know, on the other hand, you've got Enzo Fernandez, who are £100 million plus players. So therefore, you look at that situation and think, with a new head coach, game time may be limited. And it leaves you to that one situation we keep going back to. Unsavoury, unpleasant. It doesn't feel like a nice situation, but needs to be solved quite quickly because Chelsea don't want this to dominate their summer.
Yeah, I mean, there's one of two ways to look at it. We look at it on face value and we say Chelsea are helping out Conor Gallagher. They are agreeing a deal on reduced terms with Atletico Madrid and they're allowing him to continue his career away from Chelsea. The cynic in people will say, well, actually Chelsea are trying to drive out Conor Gallagher by offering him a 2-year contract plus a 1-year option when the norm, it seems to be at the club, is to offer long-term contracts of 7 years plus that year option. I'm going to predict that we're not going to hear the last of this story in this transfer window. But let's go from Conor Gallagher to one of his England teammates at Euro 2024 and one of the star performers for Gareth Southgate out there in Germany. And it is, of course, this Crystal Palace centre-back, Marc Guéhi. Michael, look, it was inevitable that bids were going to come in, even before the Euros, I think you'd have to say, given the season he'd had, but then how he performed in the Euros as well, only really highlighted what he can do. Newcastle United, what can you tell us? Is this one we should have seen coming?
Yeah, I think in terms of interest in Marc Guéhi, that was definite. It was what club is going to strike first. And it looks like Eddie Howe's Newcastle United. We know Newcastle are in for a centre-half. Now, what do we know about Marc Guéhi before the European Championships? A very good young defender. What do we know now? A very, very good young defender who can play at international level, who really impressed for England. So, now, before the Euros started, my understanding was Palace will be looking at around £60 million mark. I would imagine Crystal Palace will put that a little bit higher now after his performances. He has gone up another level. When you perform like that at international level, your stock will rise. And Crystal Palace will be waiting, I'm sure, to make more clubs to become involved. We know Eddie Howe has made centre-back a real priority this summer. But what I also know is that the selling club Crystal Palace will want to keep him. They recruit ever so well. There are many clubs who don't look at the EFL, and they really should. And Crystal Palace, under Dougie Freedman and Steve Parish, always do. Ebi Eze, Michael Elise. And then you look at Mark Gay, was a Chelsea youngster, and there are reports that Chelsea might have a sell-on. They might have the opportunity to potentially match any deals going forward. But what we do know, they've got a very, very good player in their hands. The issue Palace will have, and this is where they might have to consider some big offers, he has 2 years left on his contract.
Mark, it's Newcastle we're talking about here who have made this approach to Crystal Palace. Why would Newcastle in particular want a player like Mark Gahey?
Well, for a start, with the performances for England over the course of this summer, as Michael touched upon, he was the standout and probably most consistent performer for Gareth Southgate over the course of this summer. Missed just the one game when he was suspended. We know that Eddie Howe's in the market for a centre-back, particularly on the right-hand side, and Mark Gahey would fit the right type of profile for player that Eddie Howe likes to recruit and work with. He's someone that's excellent on the ball, comfortable in possession, great defender, great aerially, great profiling character. His personality is outstanding. You only hear really good positive things. And Newcastle want to strengthen that defence. They've obviously been building this club over the course of the last 2.5 years since the arrival of PIF. They're wanting to compete at the very highest level. Obviously, Eddie Howe punched them into the top four in that Champions League season. Last season didn't go as well, but they suffered huge injury problems. So again, when you look at what they're trying to do, they want to improve their 11, and Mark Gahey would certainly do that. In terms of the deal, it's an expensive one. And we can talk quite heavily about the financial situation at Newcastle. PSR is still going to be a big problem, and people will be saying, but no, the PSR deadline was on June the 30th. The finances reset on the 1st of July. Yes, they did. However, you can still only spend and lose over 105 million over 3 years. So that figure is still the same. The rules are still in place. So whilst you can spend the money, you can't have huge losses. And because PIF have invested heavily in Newcastle over the last 2.5 years, the spending has got to a point where they can't just go and recklessly spend much more money. This summer, they're going to have to be clever. They're going to have to be creative. And if it means potentially putting all their eggs in one basket and saying, that's the one player that is going to improve our starting 11, then let's target him. Of course, we have to remember these are just early talks. Newcastle have made initial contact with Crystal Palace. There is still a long way to go. And like Michael rightly says, other clubs could look at this situation and think, OK, we want a piece of this pie. Let's get to the table and see what the deal is.
Just before we go to the break, Mark, you're talking about them wanting to strengthen in central defence. There are other areas that they want to strengthen as well. And a deal for a player to come to Newcastle looks close. Who is it and how far along are we?
Yeah, William Usula. 20-year-old, currently at Sheffield United. Yesterday, at the start of the transfer show, we reported advanced talks. Today, deal agreed between the two clubs. It's 10 million with 5 million in add-ons. And a lot of, I guess, Newcastle fans will be looking at this saying that this isn't the type of player we need. This is someone who is young, strong, powerful, raw, but has massive potential. One key thing in this whole situation is Jason Tindall, when he got sacked from Bournemouth when he was manager in the Championship, he went and worked at Sheffield United as a coach. So he has worked up close and personal with Usula. He knows the qualities he has. And you just have to look at a lot of those players at Newcastle that have come through the setup there and been improved by Eddie Howe. Newcastle fans need to remember that's what Eddie, Jason, Stephen, Dan and Simon do, and Graham. They improve players. They work with players on the training pitch. That's part of the remit as coaches. That's the number one thing. So he would be a player, not potentially for now, but certainly someone that would be in and around that squad and could push Isak and push Callum Wilson for that number 9. He can also come in off the left-hand side as well. And the final point on that as well, when you buy a player for 10 million with amortisation, that will cost Newcastle essentially £2 million a season over 5 years, plus some add-ons. The Mark Gahey situation is very different. Just say, for argument's sake, it's £60 million. That's 12 million a year over 5 years. And this is why the striker is an easy one for Newcastle to do with their PSR. The Gahey thing can be a little bit more complicated.
And there's a good chance Newcastle's best signing this summer won't even be on the pitch. Paul Mitchell.
Possibly.
Very highly regarded sporting director who replaced Dan Ashworth. We'll wait and see.
Michael, Mark, fantastic stuff so far. Don't go anywhere. Still plenty to come. It was going to be the futures of Trent, the futures of Virgil van Dijk and Mohamed Salah as well.
Yeah, well, Mo Salah was the subject of that very late bid from the Saudi Pro League last summer. And, of course, Liverpool rebuffed that. It'd be interesting to see whether they revisit their interest in such a high-profile player that still has so much to offer the game. You've mentioned all three players. All three of those players have been key players for Jurgen Klopp. They're Premier League winners. They know how to get the job done. And there'll be players that Liverpool won't want to lose. Of course, I think from the players' perspective as well, they'll just be looking and going, right, FSG have employed Michael Edwards. We've got a new sporting director in Richard Hughes and a new head coach in Arne Slot. What are these guys like to work with? Do I want to be a part of this new era at Liverpool? Do I enjoy the coaching under Arne Slot? Do I want to commit my future? So it will be the same on both sides. And of course, Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes with the head coach will be looking at the situation and thinking, right, let's just assess where we're at. Are these the right types of players for us to go on this next part of the journey? Or are there better players out there for potentially less money? Because you know that if you secure Virgil van Dijk, Mo Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold down to new contracts, they're not going to be cheap deals to do because they are, you know, very, very good players, highly coveted, all really in the peak of their career. So that will be the number one thing. If you lose those three players, you've got three big holes. If you keep those three players, you don't need to do quite as much work in the transfer window. And I think that's the thing Liverpool fans at the moment are just struggling with because they are
Mark,
desperate.
Let me interrupt you there. The contracts will be big, but if you're saying replacing them, how much is it going to cost?
It could cost...
Well, to replace three players like that?
A top-class centre-back is between 50 and 70 million. A top-class right-back is probably between 30 and 50 million. And someone like Mo Salah, who can score goals out from the right-hand side, 70, 80, 90 million. So that's 200 million pounds plus agents' fees and wages. Huge deals to do. So keeping a hold of those players might be the best thing for them to do. But it's just that time that both camps need to assess the situation.
Absolutely. And you talk about that. There was a player I looked at the other night when they played Arsenal who I think could really have a massive season in the Premier League. Harvey Elliott.
Yep.
Really, really impressed the other night. And I know Arne Slot mentioned him as well. But sometimes it's about keeping the key players and instead of certainly bringing players in. And how many teams at the moment would you say, yeah, we're ready to go now? Maybe Arsenal?
Yeah.
Maybe Villa? Man United aren't ready. Chelsea certainly aren't ready. Spurs aren't ready. So Liverpool certainly aren't the only ones.
OK, well, their next opponents are Manchester United on that US tour. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. And let's talk about Manchester United, Mark. We know that they're pursuing both Matthijs de Ligt, a central defender, and Noussair Mazraoui from Bayern Munich. Where are we with these deals? Have they moved on at all?
They're moving on, but slowly. The two clubs in communication and have been in dialogue for some time over the course of this summer. Like you rightly say, the 26-year-old fullback Noussair Mazraoui, a target for Erik Ten Hag, and the centre-back Matthijs de Ligt, 24 years old, former Ajax man. It's not really worked out for him at Bayern Munich. Both players, funnily enough, have the same agent. So it makes these deals quite easy for Manchester United to do because you've got one representative to deal with and one club to deal with. And these are two key targets. We know that they want to strengthen in centre-back and at full-back. The full-back situation slightly different because of the Aaron Wan-Bissaka discussion that happens with West Ham at the moment. That's one to keep an eye on because dialogue continues there, but we believe there's some common ground between what West Ham want to pay and what Manchester United would like for Wan-Bissaka, who goes into the final year of his Old Trafford contract. And we know that they have been looking at centre-backs. One thing that's important to point out with this situation is that the Lenny Yoro injury has no bearing on them signing an additional centre-back. The big thing that is at play here is that Manchester United have a big squad. So they can't just go and sign 2 or 3 players because fitting them into the 25 would be tricky. And whilst they're fairly strong with PSR, they don't have to worry too much about money, although they need to keep an eye on it. The main focus is when they lose someone, they've got someone coming in. So it's almost a one-in, one-out policy. There is a gap between what Manchester United want to pay and what Bayern Munich wants, but we believe that that's not an insurmountable gap. There is some ground there that they can get to make sure everyone's happy. I think the key thing for Manchester United fans, both players open to the move to Old Trafford.
Yeah, Michael, Mark mentioned it there about Aaron Wan-Bissaka, so a potential outgoing. Are there any other outgoings that we should be looking out for the rest of this window?
Yeah, certainly one who's been a key member of Manchester United's first team is Scott McTominay. Fulham are very keen. They went back with an improved offer. It was worth 20 million. We understand it fell short of Manchester United's valuation. Got to be honest, I'm not really surprised by that. There is interest still there from Fulham, but we understand they'd be prepared to walk away if they can't agree a fee. Now, we heard from Erik Ten Hag overnight on Scott McTominay, and I think this is really interesting. Have a listen to this.
I'm so pleased with the performance from Scott McTominay, and I'm so pleased to have him in my squad. From type of person, such a huge impact on the team, team performances, team spirit, and of course now we play him more in his advanced position, what suits him obviously much better. He's so important, making goals for our team, and I'm very pleased to work with him and to have him in my squad.
Yeah, those are thoughts of Erik Ten Hag. He's bigging up Scott McTominay. He scored 10 goals for Erik Ten Hag in what was an otherwise disappointing season for the rest of the players at Manchester United. He was one of the positives, you'd have to say. But if they can get money for him, I mean, Mark, you mentioned this before. This is all about budgets. This is all about squad space in particular. So that's why, as you rightly said, we don't think it's going to be dependent on someone like Lenny Yoro's injury that they need to replace him. They need to replace someone who's going to leave the club. So if they do manage to do a deal with Fulham or another club, Galatasaray are interested as well in McTominay, they will accelerate plans to recruit a midfielder. We know that there's dialogue open with PSG over Manuel Ugarte, but the prices don't match just now. As well as a permanent move, we think United are exploring a loan with an option and an obligation as well. PSG want to do the deal because they're about to bring in João Neves. It's all like a holding pattern here, or dominoes, whichever one you want. I'm going to go holding pattern. That's my new one for this transfer window. Ugarte, we think, is open to a move. We know that they've had interest in Youssouf Fofana from Monaco, from Real Sociedad's Martin Zubimendi, and one to watch as well, which might not require necessarily someone to leave, is Sofian Amrabat, because he was actually on loan there last season. They had a €20 million option. They don't want to take up that option, but they want to negotiate with Fiorentina. And again, a loan hasn't been ruled out either. So, yeah, another quiet day in the life of Manchester United. But I'm sure we'll be hearing more on the incomings and outgoings at United. But coming up next, we will take a look around at the ins and outs from every Premier League club when these two gentlemen do the Premier League wrap, including a club record sign.